Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this month's installment of Conscious Conversations featuring the awesome team of mental health therapists at Nashville Emotional Wellness, National Emotional Wellness Counseling in Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Samantha Barstack, and I'm joined by Amanda Brown, and we're excited to spend this time with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Brown, and today we will be unpacking the topic of grief. Conscious conversations are intended to educate, uplift, and provide guidance on how to deal with life stressors. Our motto here at New is that real people helping real people with real problems. And these conversations are an opportunity to have real talk with our therapists. So let's dive in.
So today we're kind of talking about grief. And as defined by the American Psychological Association, grief is the anguished experience after the significant loss, usually the death of a beloved person, but not always. Grief often includes physiological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsessive dwelling on the past, apprehension about the future. Intense grief can become life-threatening through disruption of the immune system, self-neglect, and suicidal thoughts. Grief may also take the form of regret for something lost, remorse for something done, or sorrow for a mishap to oneself. So there are a lot of situations in which grief can occur. I think today we're going to be focusing on two big ones, but we'll go over a few. So one of the first ways that grief can occur is through job loss. When we lose our jobs, when we shift from one job to another, even of our own choice, right? That's a big one that I think people don't talk about. Another one is friendship loss. And I think we focused on friendship loss on our Instagram for a little while, which was really awesome, but it's not the conversation I feel like that most people have. Yeah,
I agree. I think that, we oftentimes focus mostly on loss of a death of a person. So these conversations today about other opportunities to look at grief in a different lens are important because you added those, and we can also talk about, infertility with loss, of course, loss of a loved one, but any other life transitions as well. So
yeah. And the last one I think of that is pretty ignored is pet loss.
Yeah,
actually, that's a big one. I think that again, it kind of goes with loss of a loved one, but I think it's more disenfranchised.
Yes.
Maybe is the right word to describe it. Of like a pet is like something that we like cherish and love and have this genuine connection to, and for some people that is like not quite their child, but like is theirs, right? Yeah, it's their it is their child. And so when they lose that and then they're just expected to go about their life and completely ignored, I think that is a pretty frustrating thing to experience.
Yes, and I don't know how many times I've heard people try to apologize for grieving for their pet. It's like, I'm sorry I'm being a mess today. Like, no, it's okay.
Yes.
Your dog died that you had for 15 years.
Yeah.
Like, that's okay.
Yeah. That's a big one, is the apologizing for grieving, right? This piece of like, oh, I'm sorry, like today is the anniversary of a loss, or I'm sorry, like even though it's been a year, I'm still feeling this. And we have such a culture of like moving on.
Get over it.
Yes.
Get over it.
And I think that we've gotten really conditioned to feel like we have to apologize for our feelings because our feelings make other people uncomfortable.
And grief's not linear.
Yeah.
Like, you can feel over it and okay today, but the littlest trigger, the smell of a cologne or a perfume or a song on the radio, or even a flower that person liked.
Yeah.
Or, something that you did at the last job can trigger you and bring you right back to feeling that intense sadness that you felt in the beginning. So it's not a linear process.
Yeah, absolutely not. And again, like I think of grief like when we first experience a loss, right? Like the job transition, friendship loss, like any experience where something about our lives, an expectation that we had about what our life would look like in the future changes. I think it feels really, really big. Like it takes up so much of our life. but the size of the grief, like it never changes.
Nope.
The depth never changes. What does change is like how big our life gets, right?
Yes.
And so we're able to like grow, we're able to live our lives. But if we hit that grief, if something triggers us, that grief is still the same. It doesn't, we don't stop grieving.
Right.
It's just our life gets bigger, so we don't hit it quite so frequently.
One of our other awesome therapists told me an analogy the other day that I just can't get rid of. Tua, she and I were talking about grief with some of our clients, and she said it's like a spiral staircase. That no matter how high you go, how far up you go, you look down and it's still there. You can still see the bottom of the stairs.
Yeah.
So it's like grief. You can still see it. It's still there. You're just moving upwards.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I thought that was a good analogy.
I like that a lot. Yeah, like you're still growing, your life is still building,
Yes.
but like that grief is always visible.
It's always visible.
Yeah,
Always there.
yeah. So I think that piece of disenfranchised grief is so prevalent in the world that we live in today,
Yes.
where so much of grief is not recognized. And so it happens in all of these other types of griefs that we're going to be talking about, right?
Yes.
And even in the loss of a loved one, right?
Yes, correct.
Because there's a lot of expectations around how you're supposed to grieve.
Yeah, that's the biggest piece, I believe, is how, and no one can tell anyone else how to feel or how they should get over something. I think that's huge. I know we often see someone who lost a loved one and they're still grieving and it's been years and you're like, well, she should just get over it. Well, how can you say that and not know that they haven't tried? So
yeah,
it's what can we do as others to help support people in their grieving? Exactly.
And that kind of brings up this piece of like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who is a very famous psychologist, I believe. She developed the like 5 stages. And it's actually the 5 stages of death and dying that people most like point to, like but so not necessarily grief, but people have this idea that the stages are like you move through them, it's linear, it's and she has made it very clear, even though again it's not particularly about grief, it's about like death, which of course are related, but she's like, it is not linear. There are stages, but you can go back and forward and skip and jump. And at some point everyone experiences those things. But I think to some degree, even though the work she has done has been incredible, it has made people believe that there's an end.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think especially the acceptance, because if you look at the stages, that's last, and so you think it's the end. Yeah. It's just like, all right, I've accepted it. I'm good. I can move on. Yeah. But that's not always true. Yeah. Because you can go back to denial
at any point.
At any point.
Yeah.
At any point.
Exactly. So again, I really think grief is a universal experience. So I'm so glad that we are able to talk about it, because at some point, every single person on this earth, probably multiple times across their life, will experience grief. Through the friendship loss, job loss, life transition, death of a loved one, pet loss, whatever, like you will experience some form of grief in some level of severity.
Yes. And how you just mentioned it, universal, thinking too about like all of the things that we've gone through as a nation, as a world in the last several years.
Yes.
We have this sort of shared grief around like COVID and COVID loss and what that did to us, and brought so many of us into isolation and so much loss of connection and grieving that. So there was like that sense of shared loss and that shared grief in that sense. But also when Matthew Perry, the Friends star, died recently.
Yes.
You know, I wasn't a huge fan of Friends. Yeah. But I watched it because a lot of my friends did. Yeah. And so just collectively grieving amongst people who we don't even know, you know, that's an interesting concept as well, as that shared grief. And community grief and compounded grief. It's just
Yeah.
a lot of things happening.
Yeah. And so I think like there's so many types of grief. Like there's also like when we think of like anticipatory grief, right?
Yes.
Like knowing that things are coming, knowing that things are changing, knowing especially in the loss of like a loved one or a pet, or even in a friendship loss, right? Where like you're moving towards maybe the end of a friendship. There's so much grief of that anticipation of it being over.
Right.
And so there are so many types of grief, I think, that are just ignored, and grief is just not a one thing.
No, it's not one and done.
Yeah, truly it is not. So I want to talk a little bit about the loss of a loved one, even though we've kind of said that is like the most maybe like accepted form of grief, but I do think it's important to acknowledge like death is the one thing I believe that is certain about this world, right?
Correct.
At one point or another, everyone is going to die or experience death, right? So that type of grief, that type of loss is very pervasive, right? And there isn't one right way to do it, and there's no end to it. But I think there are some tasks that are necessary to move through grief. Grief is a process. Grief is active. We cannot just sit in it. We have to move through it in order for it to not like consume us.
Correct. In order for our space to get bigger.
Yes, exactly.
Our capacity to get bigger to handle it.
Yeah. So there are a few tasks that I think people need to work to accomplish, and those are tasks that are to some degree never ending, right? But people need to be aware of them in order to move forward. So I'm going to go through them and explain them a little bit. The first one is to accept the reality of the loss, which I think sometimes can feel silly, but that is somewhat related to the denial piece, right? Of like, we know we logically know that this person is gone. We intellectually can say, yes, this person is no longer here, or this pet is no longer here, or even this friend is no longer here. But how do you emotionally acknowledge that? How can you wake up every day having this knowing, right? And that's something that's really hard, because sometimes you will hit that. You will be like, I feel it to my core, right? And then something happens and you're triggered, or your grief comes back in this big wave, and you have to go through that process all over again. The second is to process the pain of grief, right? And again, never ending task. No one, because especially as we're going through life with expectations around what we were going to, like how our life was going to look, how certain experiences were going to look, like a bridesmaid at a wedding, or like where we were going to be living, right? We are again then triggered to feel that pain, that sense of, I thought things were going to be different. And whether it is the loss of a loved one, or job loss, transition, friendship loss, we experience that pain anytime we're reminded that our life could have, and maybe sometimes should have
been different.
Yeah.
And I think alongside of that, say several of those things happened at one time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you lose a loved one, lose a job, and lose a pet.
Yeah.
You can't process one because now you're processing the other two.
Yeah.
And or maybe having to continue on your life as is with work, responsibilities, so that process just keeps going. It doesn't seem to stop.
And I think about like bereavement leave, and you get like a week maybe.
Oh, my job, 3 days.
3 days.
My full-time job, 3 days.
What you get 1 day to deal with each of those. You're like,
yes,
and now you're done.
And again, if it's a loss of a loved one, and then there's stipulations around that, it has to be immediate family, or something like that. And in our communities, your best friend's mom, who could be considered a second mom in many
Yes.
ways. And, if something happens to her, I want to go be with my friend,
Mhm.
but I can't take time away to
Yes.
go and
Yeah.
help and be and process this grief that while I may not feel it as intensely as my friend,
Still pretty intense.
it's still
for you.
pretty intense. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of frustrating to know in our society that it's someone somewhere decided this is the amount of time that you get to process
Mhm.
grief
Yeah.
and bereavement. Like what? 3
Yeah,
days.
3 days. And again, you work for the medical center, right?
Correct.
They should know better.
Correct. Correct. You would think so. You would think so. But that's part of that hope for me one day is to kind of bring some of these things to the forefront
Yeah.
to help not only, my own employer, but other places as well to see
Yeah.
mental health is important
Yeah.
and it's longer than 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's beyond that.
And if you support your employees and are empathetic to your employees' experiences, especially in grief, right, which can be years of just taking a few days off here and there, of needing breaks, of
Mhm.
like they are going to be feel so much more empowered to want to
Yes.
work with you and work for your company.
And to come back and be re-energized.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So the third task is to adjust to the world without the loved one, right?
mhm.
So this can be like adjustments outside of yourself, like changing things about your space, about learning new skills, about taking on new responsibilities, right? And this can also be more internal identity related
Mhm.
adjustments, right? But again, that is ongoing, right?
Yeah.
That never changes, that never stops, right? Because if someone played a role in your life, right? If you had a pet that was there that served a purpose for you, right? They served emotional support. They helped get you out of bed, right?
Yep. Get
Yeah.
get you out of the house to walk around and get some exercise.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to learn how to do these things yourself or seek out new spaces where you could be helped, where you can be supported to do these things. And so I think that's a really a really important piece is like just because that there's a space there now.
Yeah.
And we have to try and find some way to not necessarily fill it, but fill the like need that space like serves for us.
Right. And acknowledge it
Yeah.
and maybe move around it.
Yes. Yes. To get to the same place.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the last piece is, and this one I would say is particularly associated with like the loss of a loved one or with like pet loss or something like that, but absolutely you can relate this to any type of grief is to find an enduring connection, right? Finding ways to like remember the person, incorporate that person into your life, whether or not it's like through like writing letters or having a journal or like putting up pictures or I know at weddings too, people will often have like tables for lost like loved ones.
Candles.
Exactly. Candles. There's spiritual ways to feel connected. I know in different faiths they have different events that are ways to feel connected to loved ones. And I can't remember what day it is this year. But Dia de los Muertos is one of the big holidays around that as well.
Yes. Often think about the movie Coco.
Yes. We love Coco.
Love Coco, but thinking about how they honored their loved ones and that, and I love that movie and thinking about that experience.
Yeah, yeah, and so just finding those ways to feel connected to that loss, right? I know like there are people that will take their dog's tags and put them on their keys or on a necklace or like keep it in their bag so that they can see it and feel connected.
So I will say on a personal note, my husband before we met, we had a dog. Well, he had a dog before we met. And that dog became a part of our life. Yeah. My life as well. He died at 19.
Oh wow.
He was 19 years old.
Wow, that dog lived a full life.
He lived a full life. But my husband had him for 15 of those.
Yeah.
15 of that precious dog's lives. And so it was a very hard loss
Yeah,
for not only myself, but especially my husband.
absolutely.
And we planted a tree in our backyard.
Amazing. Yeah.
So we have a tree, and his collar and dog tag are hanging from the tree. And it's beautiful.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
but it's our way to
Yeah.
remember him
Yeah.
and remember and just see how it's blooming. And
Yeah.
every now and then we're like, hey Bobo, like
Yeah.
we see you.
Yeah.
We appreciate you, we miss you, we love you.
Yeah.
But I just thought that that was something that I wanted to do for him, and to let my husband know this was important
Yeah.
to you, and he was
Yeah.
important, so we're going to,
I
honor
love
him
that.
in that way.
I love that. That reminds me. So that's a pretty common thing in the Jewish faith as well, is to plant a tree when someone passes, because it's like a tree is like this connection to the earth. It's growing. It's beautiful, and that's such a like a wonderful way. And I mean, when you plant that tree, is like whenever you see it,
Yep.
you feel that connection.
You
You're
do.
reminded,
Mhm.
and again, you're reminded of good things, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't feel as hard.
Yeah,
It doesn't feel as hard.
yeah.
So
That's fantastic.
yeah, I love that.
So let's a little bit maybe shift towards maybe other types of grief.
Okay. I wanted to definitely talk about the 4 types of loss that um, of grief that we don't oftentimes expect. And they are one of them is like a loss of identity,
Mhm.
like a role definition that you thought that you were supposed to have,
Yeah,
or like when you become a mom or a dad or a wife or
Yeah.
whatever that new role may become,
yeah,
you oftentimes question, okay, well now who am I?
yeah,
And what's that identity look like
yeah,
for me now? And
Yeah.
so sometimes people grieve that loss of identity and figuring
Oh,
out
yeah.
who they are, and now trying to do so in a way that makes sense to them.
yeah,
And so it's a process, and people oftentimes don't realize that some of that, who am I, what am I doing, what is this about, is that grief of loss of identity.
absolutely. And I think with any transition, right? With
Mhm.
being a parent, with being a partner, with like the loss of a loved one, right? With I'm not a daughter, am I a daughter still? Like,
Right.
and and you're like, who am I in this world without
Yes.
this part of me?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I hear so many times when I'm working with grief with clients, they're like, all these things don't feel like they matter anymore. Things
Right.
that I thought mattered,
Right.
I don't care about. What does that mean about me?
Right. Right. I recently had that conversation with a client as well. His mom passed when he was very young, but he was succeeding and something that he was very proud of.
Mhm.
And then he said, it didn't matter to me anymore,
Mhm.
because who I wanted to tell, I couldn't tell.
Yeah,
And it was like, who am I? Why am I even doing this now?
Mhm.
Because
yeah,
she's not here.
yeah. I think it's really common, especially with death, for people to just like change jobs. Like
Mhm.
I think about like death is such a big thing, and I think about physics, that like law of physics, like every action has an equal but opposite reaction. So like when this huge thing occurs, we have this need to move in some big way as well.
Mhm.
And again, that applies to like having a baby, being a partner, right? Like it's like something has to change here.
Yes. And that kind of goes into the second loss that that people don't often talk about, as a loss of sense of physical, emotional, or mental safety.
Big one. Whoa.
Whoa, right?
That's huge.
Like if you have some sort of trauma and now your sense of safety is in question,
Yeah,
that keeps you off kilter.
yeah.
And what's our hierarchy of needs? Well, safety is at the bottom.
Yeah,
Safety is at the bottom.
It is the
Safety is
foundational
the
piece.
foundational piece of
Yeah.
that hierarchy of needs. And so to now feel like you don't have that and grieve that in a
Yeah.
way that just makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Um, Yeah, so that's a huge one that I didn't even think about before.
Yeah,
And a loss of autonomy, the ability to manage one's own life and affairs.
yeah.
Like thinking about our elderly population
Or like chronic illness.
or chronic illness, or those who are maybe in that space of needing someone to make decisions for them because of early onset dementia,
Yeah.
or some of those types of things.
Yeah.
And just grieving that I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really, that's a big one, right? You see a lot of, especially with some older folks, of not wanting to give up driving,
Oh, yes.
which I mean, especially like living in Nashville, driving is, you can't take a bus.
You have
There's
to
no,
drive.
yeah.
Yes.
And so you not saying and getting to a space of I can't drive anymore.
Right.
Is really giving up that sense of autonomy.
Right.
And sense of agency to say I can move about the world as I want when I want.
Please, right. And now you're saying that I can't?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And I think the last one would be loss of dreams and expectations, and like dealing with hopes and dreams going unfulfilled. I think about that in terms of infertility,
Mm-hmm.
and
That's a
thinking
big one.
about how couples who struggle with infertility, which we all have this dream is, well, I can't say all, most couples have a dream of marrying,
Mm-hmm.
having a family,
Mm-hmm.
which includes kids. Families often can include anything, but
Yeah.
including kids. And when that doesn't happen, when it's unexplained, or male factor or female factor or both, you grieve what you thought you were going to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
that sense of going unfulfilled and having to realize maybe our life is going to look different.
Yeah, yeah. And that, I mean, that is again such a big disenfranchised
Oh
loss.
my gosh.
So big.
So many people don't understand it.
Yeah. And I mean, again, it's this, and not everyone wants to have children, and that's absolutely okay. And I encourage people to follow their own path.
Right, absolutely.
But if you want to have a child, if you want to bring a child into this world, it's like a part of you, right?
Yes.
It's a part of your identity.
Yes.
And it's this expectation that you want to like be pregnant, grow a child, like experience that whole process. And it's not that you can't be a parent without like birthing a child, right? That's absolutely not true. But there's a sense of identity that comes with it for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And that is something that many others, especially other birthing persons who have gone through the process, they can't understand as well what people who are yearning to go through the process are feeling.
Yes.
And it's such a community of grief and needing that support and needing that sense of who am I?
Yeah.
Outside of this inability to conceive.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think about the other piece of that too, is that of like miscarriage, right?
Yes.
And
significant amounts of miscarriage.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a common experience for birthing people. Like I don't want to say most, but many people experience that.
1 in 4.
Wow.
Just about 1 in 4.
Yeah. And so I think, and you're not given really time off for that. You're not given space for that. It's not acceptable to talk about that. What do you do with that?
Yes, I am so proud of the work that is being done to not only acknowledge miscarriage as an experience of true loss, but also as a birthing experience as well. That baby had a name. That baby was someone to those who were anticipating what this life was to be. And so there's a lot of work that's being done to help support moms and dads in that area of loss and grief. So I'm excited to kind of learn more about that and be in some of that work.
Yeah. And that brings up another piece for me, like infertility, miscarriage. A lot of that in general can lead to a lot of secondary losses, right?
Yes,
Which can mean
yes,
like divorce and
yes.
disconnect and
Loss of friendship.
loss of friendships. Yeah. And so like we do like things don't happen in a vacuum.
No.
And so when we lose a friend, when we experience infertility, when we have a miscarriage, when we transition jobs, there are often quite a few secondary losses that we have. So like in the loss of a loved one, I think about a huge change in family dynamic, right? Where maybe the person who died was the connecting factor for the family, right? And now that person's not there and you no longer have a relationship with parts of your family.
Right. And you have that, like say grandma's house was the house to go to for Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And then grandma died.
Yes.
And so no one else is taking up the realm to do it for Thanksgiving. So you lose that connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going forward. So it kind of leads into like compound grief.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It kind of goes into multiple losses being experienced at one time.
Yeah.
And not even recognizing that some of these are secondary and not necessarily primary, but they're all kind of coming together at one time.
Yeah.
So what do we do about that?
Yeah. And that's it's such a hard thing to sit with, right? And I think when grief starts to compound like that, that's when it's so important to start seeking out support.
Correct.
Right. And we talked about this a little bit before. Grief is one of those universally experienced processes. And it is probably one of the things that people don't seek out support for because it's something that everyone has to deal with. So why don't you just have to get over it, right? But like we said, things do not happen in a vacuum. And grief can manifest in so many different ways in your body, in your health, in your life, not being able to get up and go to work, right? That takes a toll. It really takes
if you don't have that time off,
yes,
then that's loss of income.
Yes.
Loss of, the ability to maybe pay for bills.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a ripple effect.
Truly, truly. And grief can really, if it becomes so, if it takes up so much space in your life and your life is not growing, if you're just stuck, right? It can be life changing. It is life changing, but it can derail your life to such a way that you really are no longer living it yourself,
right? Grief's living it for you.
Yeah, truly, truly. I think about in grad school, I was taking this grief class. It was wonderful, wonderful class. And one of my professors was talking about how she had a client who had not touched her son's room in 25 years.
Oh, wow.
Like she would go in the room every day and sit in the room and cry. And it was the exact same. Wow. She would clean it, but that was what she would do. She lost friends, she lost family, she lost all these connections because she was stuck in it, right? Like what I said earlier, grief is a process. Grief is active. We have to be moving through it. And as long as we're moving through it, doesn't matter how fast we're moving through it, because we never get to the other side, but it's a movement. It's fluid, right? It moves with us, it grows with us. But when we get stuck, that's when we really have to start talking about conversations for support and seeking out professionals, seeking out grief support groups, seeking out friends and family, and just letting people know that we are suffering.
And I think also sometimes when you're so stuck in that grief, you don't often see that you need help.
Yeah.
So being that loved one or that friend or that person to maybe help be supportive and recognize, hey, can we possibly get you some support? What can we do to support?
Yeah.
How can we help you?
Yeah.
I remember as a social worker told me before, oftentimes in grief is not what you say to the grieving person, it's how you say it.
Yes. Yes.
And sometimes what you don't say as well. And so just thinking about those conscious conversations that we're having with our grieving loved ones and our friends to ensure that we're not hindering their process,
Mhm.
but also making sure that if no one else is seemingly recognizing that someone's stuck in their grief,
Mhm.
maybe if we recognize it, gracefully help them
Yeah.
to get that support that they need.
Absolutely. And again, it kind of goes back to like very early on in this conversation of just not having to apologize or feel bad
Yes.
for the suffering that we experience.
Right. Absolutely.
And I think a lot of like, there's a few good podcasts out there, right? And a lot of these podcasts talk about like how you talk about grief with other people and how their expectations and how they respond make you change your behavior in order to instead of them supporting you, you now are having to turn around and attend to them because your grief makes them
uncomfortable. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's so important in supporting people who experience or are experiencing significant grief and significant loss in any of its forms is to really do your best to acknowledge that this isn't about you.
Right.
Right. And so not letting it turn around and make them feel, and again, or set a tone of, I don't want to be able to hold space for you.
Right. And so how many people have felt alienated because they're still grieving so hard and so long on something that other people are feeling like they're needing to get over. They don't come around family events. They don't do this or they don't do that, in part because we collectively have made them feel uncomfortable in their process instead of trying to be supportive.
Yeah. And again, I think when you can't be authentic, when you can't be honest, when you're feeling judged or shamed for what you're experiencing, and again, what you're experiencing is already hard. You don't need anyone's judgment or shame to make it worse, right? Why would you want to be around those people? Why would you want to spend time with those people? Why would you want to show up to a job, right? In one of my grief groups, I had a client talk about how they had asked for a certain day off because it was like the day that they had lost their parent, and their boss said, "You're still dealing with that."
Oh wow.
And it was just so like it's so, I don't want to say it's surprising because it's not.
But it is.
Yes.
But it is.
Yeah. It's the like, again, where's the empathy?
There isn't.
Yeah.
And I think more people, as you said earlier, would feel supported, would feel, as if they mattered.
Yes.
If their employer or even their direct person, who they report to, was more empathetic.
Yes, absolutely.
And more, engaging in that should have gone, Sam, I understand. Take as much time as you need.
Yes.
Let's see if we can get Amanda to help cover your people.
Yes. Yeah. And again, that leads to all of these other losses that you were talking about, right? That piece of identity loss. And when you feel like you're having to like put on and pretend and fake it all the time, you get lost. You have no energy to engage with and be yourself. And so you lose these parts of your identity, right? And so I think about like new parents, right? And like how there's so little understanding and patience. People are like, oh, you probably haven't slept or all of that stuff, but there's so much more that comes with it, right? And you lose a sense of self, right? When do you go get to be Amanda? You don't, right? And so, but especially when you don't have a understanding coworker or understanding boss, you are spending so much more time and energy trying to get through the day. And then even when there's time to go be Amanda, you're in bed, you're passed out.
And you're like, what does Amanda even look like?
Yeah, she's gone. She's out the door.
And I literally just read a thing last night that was unrelated to this, but in a sense it is. It was saying with new moms, we oftentimes focus so much energy and effort when you're coming over to visit to tend to the baby.
Yeah.
The baby is taken care of.
Yes.
go tend to the mother.
Yes. Yes.
Go tend to the mother and make sure the mother is not having some of these sense of
Yes.
identity loss, and go support her.
Yes.
See what she needs.
Yes. And so I think, and that's a big conversation I'm sure you have with new moms, is that sense of identity loss. And how to make sure to build in time, because we know that when if you are married, or even as fathers too, right? Like, if you don't have time to be you, it's much harder to be present in your life with your
Correct.
family.
Correct. And,
Um,
and it's harder to show up as a good parent or a good spouse if you're not good to yourself.
Exactly. And I impress this upon all my new mothers, all my new clients. We don't want a perfect parent.
No.
We do not ever
No.
say I am a perfect parent.
No.
I will say you are not. I will say you are doing it wrong. I won't say that, but
you'll want to say that.
We want a good enough parent. We want a parent that makes mistakes. We want a parent that has flaws. We want a parent that is human, but is willing to have conversations, is willing to model. I am an independent person. I'm also a mother. I'm also a partner. And how we do that is by creating empathy for people to be flawed, for people to be human, so they don't lose that sense of identity. So they're allowed to grieve. They're allowed to be authentic, and they're not having to push all these feelings down and attend to other people.
And to feel our feelings.
Yes.
I think what I've been thinking about so heavily lately is that, at least growing up for me, it seems as though you only had to be happy, right? You had to be happy all the time. And if you weren't happy, there was something wrong. And you needed to figure out a way to get happy.
Yes.
Because we don't do sad, we don't do mad.
That was in private. You could go in your room and be sad.
Correct. And grieving, girl, get over that. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like feeling the full gamut of emotions, because we have that feelings wheel. That sprouts. Every which of way. And there's multiple emotions to feel. And happy is just a part of it. And so allowing ourselves to sit in our grief, to sit in our sadness, to allow ourselves to feel happiness, of course, but also feel these other things too, allows us to be our authentic selves.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that's something that we really, really struggle with, is getting in touch, like being able to get in touch with and naming our emotions. That feelings wheel, let me tell you, I have it in every office. I have it laminated. I pull it, like every single client gets one, because it's not something that people have a conversation about. We know that the general be sad, and but there's so much more.
There's so much more.
And again, like, it's not our job to filter our emotions. It's not our job to, like, make people comfortable with our emotions. As long as we're not harming anyone, as long as we're not being malicious, as long as our intent is to just feel, right? No, we are not responsible for how anyone responds to our emotions.
Absolutely. And I think realizing that is so empowering.
It
allows us to be our model, real people.
Exactly.
It allows us as the clinicians to also be real people. And to allow for our clients to do the same.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I love working for this practice, is because we really, when you come and sit in an office with us, when you come and have a conversation with us, we're going to sit and we're going to be frank and upfront. We are going to have authentic responses to things, right? And that is not to say we're going to make it about us in any way, but we are going to say what we're thinking. We are going to say what we believe. It's not going to be this like cookie cutter, like broken down. We're going to, and I think by doing that, right, we're modeling for our clients. All right, this is how you go about and engage in the world. And that can be professional, and that can be authentic, and that can be like empowering.
You said a mouthful, but everything that I agree with. Because when I sought out joining a practice, yes, I could go on my own, but I wanted to join a community and join this practice particularly because of that,
Yeah.
because literally everyone models the motto.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone models it, and it's such a genuine spirit within this practice of wanting to show up and show out authentically.
Yeah.
Authentically.
Yes. And I think that piece of like, we really foster in the sense of grief, right? We absolutely have all experienced it over the past few years, and being able to have conversations about it in supervision, in
Yes.
like our staff meetings and things like that, of saying, hey, this week was kind of really bad for me, and
Yes.
I'm sorry for all the emails that I need to get back to, and I'm sorry, and I'll do this. And everyone is like, take what you need.
Yes.
Every single person.
Yes.
And that is such a space for us when we're grieving, when we're needing to sit with stuff, when we're needing support, we feel empowered to take it.
Yes. I swear I told everyone in my family and all of my friends about our staff meeting where I expressed about the injustices happening in my hometown.
Yeah.
Where there's such collective grief surrounding the senseless murder of Steve Perkins. I was so appreciative of the space that was held to talk about him and to talk about what happened. And while in the midst of that grief, I felt so supported by everyone on the call.
Yeah.
Everyone held space, and you could tell on everyone's faces that everyone was listening and supportive. And then to receive an email later on from the team as well was just very much I'm in the right place at the right time. And yes, I have this going on and still trying to do all the things. It just felt really good to have a practice to see the grief, notice the grief, call it out.
Yeah.
But also be, hey, how can we support you?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you need?
Yeah. And again, just should be a model.
Should be a model. It's like, hey, full-time employers who are big, corporations.
Yeah.
Make sure this is how you do it.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to be authentic in those spaces, being able to share your feelings, have emotions, right?
Yeah.
Allows you to have the space to go about the rest of your day and live your life and be present.
Yes.
In all of these other ways, right? So the grief is still there.
Yep.
But you're building your life because the people around you are attending to you, and you are not having to attend to them.
Right. And you're allowed. And one of the things I've been, telling clients lately is set aside that time. If it's set aside a timer, if you need to.
Yes, we love a timer.
A good timer, right?
Yeah.
Give yourself a dedicated amount of time to feel your feels.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then leave it there.
Yeah.
And you can move on for the rest.
And you can always go back to it.
And you can go back to it.
Yes.
But if you have a task that you need to complete, but you're feeling so heavily in your moment of grief.
Yeah.
Set that timer.
Yeah.
Feel those feels.
Yeah.
And then let's set it aside for the day.
Yeah. That reminds me, and I love a good timer. Have you seen Shrinking on Apple TV? Highly recommend. It's with Harrison Ford and Jason Segel, and it's about a psychologist, I believe, who lost his wife in a car accident. And he just kind of completely goes off the rails and is doing things we're very much not allowed and encouraged to do that are unethical. But it's a comedy, but there's some great tidbits in there. And Harrison Ford has, I believe he has Parkinson's.
Okay.
And he talks about how 10 minutes a day he sits and he listens to sad music, and he just lets himself feel bad, right? Lets himself say, I'm losing my autonomy. And there's that, you see that process of him maybe shouldn't be driving anymore, like changing the way he is, maybe getting comfortable with a new life path that maybe he didn't expect.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to add that to the list.
It's good. It's hysterical. And to some degree mildly inappropriate.
Gotcha. Okay, noted.
We do enjoy it quite a bit. It's good.
I'll have to add that. That sounds good though.
Yeah. But I will say it's one of the more accurate depictions of grief, of being stuck in grief, of this is a person who knows, like, even us,
Mhm.
even we who know what we need to do.
Right,
Grief is so big,
right.
and it's such an umbrella. It's such like a big heavy blanket, and anyone can get stuck.
Yes. Oh, like a good heavy weighted blanket.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like sometimes you think it feels good.
yeah. To sit in the
To
memories
sit,
and
yeah, to sit in that and let that hold you down. And so if it does feel good in that moment, stay in that moment, but try your hardest not to get stuck.
yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah, I think we made it through.
I think we did.
So we'll give a little thanks to everyone at New who has offered support and kind of been such a good resource for us. Thank you all for tuning in to this month's edition of News Conscious Conversations. We hope you were inspired, uplifted, and empowered. If you have any questions, reflections, or feedback, we want to hear from you. Feel free to leave us a comment or reach out to us via email at contact@newcounselingpllc.com.
It is our goal to equip you with the tools to be the best versions of yourselves. Everyone needs a safe, supportive space that will allow them to reconnect with themselves. If you ever need any additional support, we're here for you. We'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves and each other.